On the weathered notice board outside the general store, between scraps of paper faded with time and knife marks carved in haste, hung a yellowed sheet. Wanted, housekeeper and cook at Hollow Creek Ranch. Good wages, no questions asked. Cole Hargrave, the widower who kept to himself on the ranch, whispered to be cursed. And Mara Ellison, the woman branded by the stain of a broken betrothal. If fate had a cruelest trick, it was binding together two outcasts the town wanted gone. But destiny was not a gift. It was a sentence awaiting judgment. In the saloon, folks murmured, "Hollow Creek is cursed. Whoever steps in never comes out." Yet the very place they feared was the only place that asked no questions. The one thing Mara craved more than bread itself. Beneath the stifling heat and the sneers inside that saloon, the paper quivered in the wind. Mara stood there and whispered, "If no one else dares, then this is my chance." And as she set her steps upon the trail leading to Hollow Creek, Red Haven shivered, for there are doors that once opened will never close again. Red Haven, New Mexico, summer 1882. On the corner of the small town square, outside the O'Malley family's general store, stood a dark wooden notice board, scarred with knife marks, rusted nails, and scraps of paper long since faded. Folks pinned all manner of things there. Reports of stolen goods, horses up for sale, harvest time jobs for hay cutters, sometimes even a hastily scribbled obituary in watered ink. But there was one paper different from the rest, one that had clung there for years, yellowed as if sun and desert wind had tried their hardest to erase it, only to fail. The words, though blurred, were still legible. Wanted, housekeeper and cook at Hollow Creek Ranch. Good wages, no questions asked. The people of Red Haven were well acquainted with that notice. Some said it was bait, a test of courage. Others laughed and swore that anyone who stepped foot on Hollow Creek Ranch would never return. The man who owned that land, Cole Hargrave, was a name sharp enough to hush every saloon the moment it was spoken. Once wealthy, once blessed with a whole family, he had lost everything in a single night. His wife and his only boy. Since then, he had retreated into his ranch like a shadow, surfacing only to send someone to town for salt, tobacco, and strong whiskey. The stories grew darker with each telling. Some swore they had seen a flicker of lamplight in the child's room at midnight, though no laughter had come from there in years. Others claimed they'd heard gunfire echo in the wind, rolling down from the southern hills. No one dared step close enough to find out, and no one dared tear that notice down, as if it were some mark that shouldn't be touched. In the blistering noon heat, Mara Ellison stopped before the board. She stood long enough to draw a few curious glances, which turned into shakes of the head before folks walked on. Mara was no stranger to such looks. She had passed through many towns, carrying a name stained by whispers, an empty-handed woman, with no husband, no child, no property, only the blemishes of rumor she had long ceased to fight. Pushed out of boarding houses and turned away from farms, she had grown used to living on the thin line between scorn and pity. But today, beneath the sun that melted the dirt road, her eyes lingered on that yellowed sheet. The words, "good wages," seemed to flare brighter in her mind than all the murmurs. And more than that, it was the last line that held her. No questions asked. No place in this world had ever offered her that. Everywhere else, people pried, people judged, people dragged her old shame back into the light. But at Hollow Creek Ranch, if the paper spoke true, there would be no questions, no past dragged out, only work and pay. A dry gust stirred, rattling the notice. Mara heard her own voice rasp, hoarse from too many sleepless nights. If no one else dares, then this is my chance. Across the street, a cluster of men loitered outside, Dalton's saloon. One of them snorted, loud enough for Mara to hear. What kind of fool dreams of walking into Hollow Creek Ranch? The others roared with laughter, before sinking back into banjo twang and whiskey haze. Mara did not answer. She only looked once more at the paper, drew a deep breath, and pressed the decision hard into her heart. That evening, as the sun bled red over the rusted rooftops, folks watched Mara Ellison pack. An old canvas bag, a few patched dresses, a worn Bible, and a silver-hilted dagger her father had left her. No one asked where she was going. No one saw her off. Only her shadow stretched long across the red dirt road leading west, toward Hollow Creek Ranch, which waited silent as a dare. They always said only the desperate would walk into a cursed place. But Mara knew. Desperation could also be a kind of freedom. And perhaps it was the last chance a woman like her would ever have to rewrite her fate. Whispers always walked ahead of Mara's steps, like a shadow she could never shake. In this harsh land, they said, a name tainted by scandal weighed heavier than boots caked with mud. In Kansas, she had once been driven out over a rumor whose truth no one cared to prove, that she had carried on something improper with a married lawyer. Mara had remained silent. No denial, no defense. She knew too well that the harder one tried to scrub a stain, the deeper it set. And so, one morning when she stepped into the marketplace, the stares that met her were no longer familiar. They held a stranger's contempt and pity sharp enough to cut. Within a week, her landlord told her she must leave. Her journey stretched from there through small towns strung across the plains. She carried only a fraying canvas bag, a handful of coins, and her mother's silver hair clasp, the last fragile reminder that once she had been an unmarked girl, not yet branded. But the West offered no second chances. At the next town, the cycle repeated, cruel and unbroken. The rumor of the disgraced woman outran her faster than any horse. This time she didn't need to hear the words. The wary glances, the murmurs behind her back, those alone told her she was on borrowed time. And sure enough, 10 days later, an old merchant found her and shook his head, his voice carrying more sorrow than anger. Hollow Creek is no place for a lone woman. Don't be fool enough to head there. Mara tightened her grip on her bag, the calluses in her palms biting into skin. She had heard this warning too many times. Only the town names and the voices changed. But today, beneath Red Haven's blistering sun, she answered quietly, I have no road left behind me. That's the place I must go. The reply left the merchant stunned. Perhaps he had never seen eyes so desperate and yet so unyielding. On her way out of the market, wind kicked red dust high, veiling the road north. Mara pulled her headscarf close, hiding from the probing eyes of a cluster of women at the well. A child pointed toward her, asked something, then was yanked back by its mother's hand. Mara quickened her pace, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from knowing she was about to gamble everything. On the weathered town board, the yellowed notice still clung against sun and wind. Wanted, housekeeper and cook at Hollow Creek Ranch. Good wages, no questions asked. Beneath the board, the muddied imprints of many boots had long faded. Plenty had stopped to read, but none had dared pull it down. Everyone knew its master, Cole Hargrave, had lived like a phantom since the fire that claimed his wife and child. Folks said that ranch was cursed. Some even whispered Cole himself had turned beast, speaking to no one, save for the horses, whose cries echoed from Hollow Creek Valley at nightfall. Mara stared at the paper for a long while. Something in her chest tightened. Not fear, but the strange pull of being called. A place that terrified everyone else might just be the only place willing to accept her. A master who asked no questions might be the only soul who cared nothing for her past. She reached out and tore the notice free. The brittle edge ripped at one corner, but the words remained clear. Folding it, she tucked it into her coat. In that instant, she felt the eyes of men by the saloon still upon her. They thought her mad. Mara did not look back. That afternoon, she hired an old wagon from a driver on the edge of town. He squinted at her and frowned. "You certain? Hollow Creek's 2 days' ride through rock hills and dry riverbeds. Hardly anyone sets foot there anymore." Mara laid her last coins on the worn plank table. "Just take me to the gate. I'll walk from there." The driver almost pressed her further, but her eyes, cold as forged steel, silenced him. By nightfall, desert wind lashed her skin raw. The wagon jolted over the ruts, and Mara remembered each time she had been cast out. Each night she'd slept beneath open eaves, each cutting glance that had pierced her like a blade. At dawn, when the sun burst crimson over the horizon, the wagon crested the barren ridges. The driver jerked his chin forward. "There, Hollow Creek Valley. This is where I turn back." Mara climbed down, her skirt thick with dust, her shoes worn at the heels. Before her stretched the valley, scarred into the land like an old wound. The house stood silent, ringed by sagging fences and a derelict stable. The place breathed of death, just as the rumors claimed. But to Mara, the sight carried a different weight. Freedom from the stairs, the last chance at a beginning. She drew one long breath and stepped toward the leaning gate. No one came to meet her. Only the wind shrieked through split boards, and the smell of rotted hay rose from the ground. And in her mind, a single question echoed. The question that would follow her on this road. Could a woman branded in shame breathe life into a house of the dead? Hollow Creek Ranch lay in a wide valley, ringed by jagged mountains as barren and looming as giant tombstones. The road wound through fields of grass long since yellowed, broken by thorn brush and the skeletons of dead oaks. It felt like a place that once held life but had been hollowed out, left as a shell waiting for the wind to carry away the last remnants. Folks said every timber of the big house remembered the laughter of a child and the lavender scent planted by its mistress along the walk. But what Mara saw now was only darkness gathered behind shuttered windows. The house stood massive, its long porch casting a shadow. The wood siding darkened and damp with rot. It looked like a great tomb, so silent that any newcomer would feel they trespassed. Jonas, the old horse hand, walked beside her. His beard was silver, dusted with trail grit, his trembling hands clutching the reins. He did not hurry. Each step dragged, as if to delay the moment Mara crossed into her fate. His voice was gravel rough. "The woman before you lasted 7 days. The one before that ran off in the night. Some said they heard a child crying in the hallway. Others swore they saw the mistress's ghost drifting in the dead lavender garden." Mara tightened her grip on her bag. The wind tugged her worn shawl, but the words did not make her falter. If anything, they pressed her resolve deeper. A woman driven from 2 towns had nothing left to lose. If she turned her back even here, then there would be no road left at all. The house yawned before her, The heavy door groaned as Jonas shoved it open. Inside came the stench of mildew, old ash, and something sharp like rusted iron. Pale light leaked through cracks in the shutters, turning the dust motes into drifting sparks. Mara stepped across the threshold, her worn shoes creaking on the cold planks. The first sound was not her own, but a slow, deliberate rhythm, the tread of footsteps descending the stairs. Jonas eased back as if by habit, leaving her to face it alone. Cole Hargrave emerged. He was tall, broad-shouldered, a dark leather coat drawn across a frame honed by labor. His hair brushed his collar, streaked with gray among the black. But it was not his stature that made Mara freeze. It was his eyes. Gray as steel, cold, cutting. They didn't rest on her face or form, but seemed to pierce through, searching for weakness deep inside. He stopped at the last step. His voice was low, dry. The last ones all ran. Mara felt her heart pound hard against her ribs, but she did not lower her gaze. The brown of her eyes, shadowed with the sleepless dark beneath, met his steady. "I won't run." The silence stretched. Only the wind whistled through the cracks. Jonas nodded faintly, as if he had just watched a new game begin. Cole turned, his coat brushing the stair rail. "Jonas, take her to the kitchen. If she lasts a week, then we'll see." There was no faith in his tone, only the sentence of one already, counting down to failure. Mara followed Jonas down the long corridor. Dust clung to the walls, and half-covered portraits sagged under old cloth. At a bend, she caught a glimpse of a half-open door. From within the shadow, a scrap of white, like a child's dress, fluttered. She paused, but Jonas shut the door quick and muttered, "Best leave some things alone. This house has more in it than you ought to mind." In the kitchen, the air was thick with rust and cold ashes. Mara set down her bag, lifted an old pot, and scrubbed the dust away. Her hands knew the work well. Poverty had taught her how to endure and make do. Yet beneath it all, she felt the weight, a noose tightening though no rope lay near. Night fell. The ranch sank into silence. Mara spread her thin blanket in the kitchen corner, her back to the wall. The wind moaned through the shutters, carrying the sense of whispers on the porch. She closed her eyes, but Cole's gray gaze burned behind them, sharp and merciless. Not the eyes of a man simply bereaved, but of one who had stood too close to death and had never stepped fully back. And just as she thought sleep would take her, a sound creaked above, heavy footsteps crossing the upstairs floor. Jonas had said Cole never let anyone stay more than a week. But those steps, they were slower, heavier, belonging to someone else. Mara's eyes snapped open, her breath stilled. "I said I wouldn't run," she told herself in silence. "Even if this house is a grave, I'll hold my ground." Work at Hollow Creek Ranch never ended. The house sprawled like some ancient fortress, every room veiled in dust as though no human foot had crossed its threshold in years. Mara began with the kitchen, where scorch marks scarred the iron stove and the smell of rancid beef fat clung in the grout. She scrubbed patiently, even as her hands bled. Only when the slanted light of evening streamed across a table now gleaming clean did she dare lean back and sigh. That night she curled on a narrow cot by the hearth, listening to the wind moan through the walls and to Cole's heavy steps above, sporadic, restless, like a phantom still pacing. On the third day, Mara turned her efforts to the eastern wing. The hallway stretched long, thick with cobwebs, sunlight cutting down in narrow beams alive with dust. She opened room after room, brushing curtains, folding ragged linens, sweeping silence from every corner. It was too quiet, as though even the walls conspired to guard a secret. At the far end stood a door unlike the rest. Its wood had darkened with time, the iron handle icy under her touch, furred with dust. Mara pressed. The door was locked. Reason told her to move on, but instinct urged otherwise. From the ring of keys Jonas had handed her that first day, she found a small one tucked in the bunch. She tried it. The lock clicked. The door eased open, releasing a sickly sweet smell of mildew and rotted wood. Mara froze. This was no ordinary bedchamber. It was a nursery. In the dim light, she saw a small crib against the wall, its blankets worn thin yet folded neatly. On the shelf sat wooden toys, a carved horse a few blocks, a tiny drum coated in dust. A baby carriage leaned to one side, its wheel locked in place. Everything felt abandoned in haste, left behind on a morning no one returned from. Mara's chest clenched. She crept toward a low shelf where a few children's books lay strewn. Her fingertips brushed their spines, sending dust adrift. One volume gaped, and inside was a folded sheet of paper. Something urged her to pull it free. It was no childish scribble. It was a will unsigned, undelivered. The words trembled in black ink. The entirety of Hollow Creek Ranch shall belong to the firstborn son of Cole Hargrave. Mara's heart stopped. Her pulse hammered. Questions crowded her mind. A son? Where was he? Had he perished? If so, the will was meaningless. Yet why had it been hidden here, never filed? She clutched the paper, her hands shaking. And then Cole's voice, sharp as a blade, cut the air behind her. "What are you doing in here?" Mara spun. Cole loomed in the doorway, the hall light casting him in shadow, his eyes gray steel, his breath harsh. "I was only cleaning," she stammered. He strode forward, snatched the paper from her hand, folded it, and shoved it into his coat. The door slammed shut with a crack. "This room stays closed. Always. Understand?" Mara nodded, her heart thundering. Cole locked the door, slid the key onto his belt, and without another word, strode away, his steps echoing heavy down the corridor. Mara stood rooted, fear and curiosity warring inside her. She knew she had brushed against his deepest wound. Yet she also understood. That room, that will, was the key to the house, and to Cole Hargrave. In the days that followed, the air in the ranch grew heavier. Cole spoke little to her, only gave clipped orders: muck the stable, prepare meals, heat water. But whenever Mara caught his gaze flick toward the eastern hall, she knew the old grief never slept. One morning, while serving breakfast, Mara tried gently, "Would you like me to clean the eastern wing? Only to clear the dust." Cole's eyes flared. He set down his spoon hard. "Never speak of it again." Mara lowered her head, but inside the fire of her curiosity raged. What did the will mean? If one day it were brought to light, would this ranch even belong to Cole? Or would it spark a battle of law and blood, ripping old wounds raw? She knew her fate was now tied to this house, and the nursery door, locked, silent, was the hinge upon which the whole tragedy turned. At Hollow Creek Ranch, dawn did not arrive with soft rose like in the crowded towns, but with a harsh, dry gold, slipping between the ridges and crawling down the frost-bitten prairie. A lone rooster crowed, its cry thin and lost in a land where both life and death seemed suspended. Mara woke while mist still clung outside the window. the guest chamber still faint with the scent of last night's dying embers. She rose, tied her hair back with her worn silver clasp, and stepped softly down to the kitchen. The place sprawled too large, yet had been abandoned too long. The oven lay cold, its walls caked with soot, as if time itself had settled there. Mara began to rummage, not for food at first, but for traces of the lives once lived here. In a cupboard, behind hardened jars of salt, she found a leather-bound notebook, its spine cracked with age. When she opened it, pages yellowed with years revealed a woman's delicate handwriting. Recipes, plain yet laced with care. The name on the first page halted her. Eliza Hargrave, Cole's wife. The woman who had died with her son in the accident still whispered about in town. Mara brushed her finger lightly across the ink, as though touching the shadow of someone she had never met. She made her choice. This morning, the meal would come from Eliza's book. By first light, the kitchen awoke with the ring of knife and board. Mara coaxed flame into the cold stove, the fire's first glow painting her face in amber. She fried salted meat with onions, simmered potatoes till soft, set cornbread to bake. The aroma spread down the hallways, seeping into air long steeped in gunpowder and ash, stirring the house like a body roused from sleep. Out at the barn, Cole Hargrave halted mid-step, reins slack in his hand. He caught the scent. For years he had lived on thin coffee, refusing breakfast, refusing anyone the right to touch this kitchen. But this fragrance, rich, familiar, alive, was like Eliza herself had brushed past him. When he entered the dining room, Mara had already laid the table. The long wood surface, once blanketed in dust, now bore meat, potatoes, cornbread, and a pot of coffee dark and strong. Mara said nothing. She simply took her seat. Cole stared at the plate. His voice rasped. "Where did you find this?" Mara's smile was faint. Her eyes stayed on the coffee pot. "A kitchen needs breath to live. I only gave it what it was meant to have." Cole gave no reply. He lifted his fork, tasted a bite. Salt, onion, the earthy softness of potato. Memory crashed over him. He was back in a morning years gone. Eliza, in her cotton dress, placing the dish before him, reminding him to eat well for the day's work. Their son's laughter echoed, small hands pattering the table. The sound slashed through him like a knife. Cole dropped the fork, fists tightening on the table. Mara caught the blue veins rising in his wrist, but did not interrupt. Some griefs had to be faced, not hidden, Jonas. The old horse hand shuffled in soon after. His brows rose at the sight of the table set. Then he nodded once, slow as though thinking it's been too long. He pulled out a chair, scooped potatoes without ceremony. The simple act softened the room, easing what memory had sharpened. Cole sat rigid, eyes fixed on the plate as though torn between banishing it and clinging to it. At last, he picked up the fork again. He ate, slowly, cautiously, but the truth showed. The taste had struck the deepest part of him. The meal passed in few words. Jonas ate with quiet relish, murmuring his approval now and then. Mara poured coffee, offered bread, and kept her silence. Cole ate little, yet his gray gaze no longer held its full frost. There was a crack now, slight but real, where memory and present bled together. When the meal ended, Cole shoved back his chair, rose. He did not look at Mara. His voice was flat, sharp. "Don't do this again. He strode out, the door nearly slamming in his wake. Mara did not flinch. She cleared the table with steady hands. On her lips flickered the barest smile, not victory, but recognition. This house and the man within it had begun to breathe again. Outside on the porch, Cole halted, one hand braced against the post. He lifted his face to the morning sky, sighed. The taste, the scent, the memory of Eliza braided through him, striking at the heart he had sealed to ice. He despised the feeling. He was grateful for it. Back in the kitchen, Jonas watched Mara tidy. He tapped a finger against the wood, then muttered low, "You've made him remember. Memory can kill a man, but it can save him too." Mara said nothing, only lowered her head. She knew every step she took here was a gamble, but like the day she reached for that yellowed notice, she did not turn back. Outside, the prairie wind caught the tattered flag at the ranch gate, snapping it awake. Hollow Creek Ranch, long as a grave, trembled at the touch of a simple meal, and from that moment, the fate of every soul within its walls had begun to shift, though none yet knew it. The sky over Red Haven sagged heavy that day, as though it too sensed something coming. Gray clouds rolled in, swallowing the morning sun, draping the valley in a cold, silver light. From the northern ridge came a thunder of hooves, dust rising thick, the sound beating like a drum of fate. At the head rode Ambrose Kane, the wealthiest landowner in the territory, and the ghost from Cole Hargrave's past. Ambrose wore a long black coat, collar raised to cover half his face. His gloves gleamed, one hand clutching the reins, the other flicking a riding crop. His posture commanded, practiced in the art of domination. Two heavy-set men flanked him, revolvers strapped at their sides, eyes darting like hounds sniffing blood. When they reached the gate of Hollow Creek Ranch, they did not knock. One crack of the crop sent the old wood swinging, hinges groaning like a spirit disturbed from slumber. Mara, hanging linens in the yard, lifted her head. The sight of Ambrose made her chest tighten, not from recognition, but from the way his eyes slid over her, prying, filthy, as though he knew every shadow she had tried to bury. Cole stepped from the porch, gray eyes sweeping the riders before fixing on the face of the man who had once shared a battlefield with him. No handshake, no greeting. Only silence so thick even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Hargrave," Ambrose's voice was low, scraping, like a dull knife dragged over rust. "Word is you've taken on house help again. Remarkable. I thought Hollow Creek had become nothing but a grave, for you and your ghosts." Cole said nothing, his gaze hard as stone. Mara set down the linen, took half a step back, then steadied herself beside Cole, a silent declaration she would not retreat. Ambrose narrowed his eyes, a sneer curling his lips. "And who is she?" "Ah, yes. I've heard the name in Kansas. A woman who turned a whole town against her. Bold of you, or desperate, to let such scandal into your house." The words cut cold. Mara bit down hard, but kept her head high. She was used to scorn, but with Cole beside her, it felt different, like she had to stand not only for herself, but for the house as well. Cole spoke, voice level, sharp as steel. "Who works here is no business of yours. Say what you came to say." Ambrose laughed, the sound hollow, his eyes unmoved. "What I came for. Water. Hollow Creek holds the southern stream. My land thirsts. Hundreds of cattle need drink. You've got nothing here but a rotting house and dry fields. Sell to me. Spare yourself and this woman the hunger that's bound to come." Mara glanced sideways, but Cole never shifted, his stare anchored like iron. "Hollow Creek is not for sale." Silence swelled, broken only by the horse's breath. Ambrose leaned closer in the saddle, lowered his voice for Cole alone. "Don't forget who saved you at Antietam. Without me, you'd have drowned in that red mud. You owe me your life." Cole's mouth twisted in a strange, bitter smile. "You remember it wrong, Kane. It was I who pulled you from the bayonet's edge. The life you parade as your own was bought with my blood. And this is how you repay me?" Ambrose's face darkened. He was not used to the memory spoken aloud. To him, that war had been nothing but a stage to build his legend. The truth, that Cole had been the savior, was a corpse he had buried deep. Now Cole's words had dug it up before his men. Their eyes flickered, uncertain. Mara's fingers clutched her skirt. The image of the will hidden in the nursery shot through her mind. Hollow Creek was not only land and water, it was legacy. And Ambrose's presence told her that paper could be the spark of a blaze yet to come. Ambrose straightened, voice raised to mask the crack. "Stay then, starve then. But mark me, she won't last. A woman who shamed good families once will shame this cursed house too. When the town learns the truth, she'll be driven out again." He wheeled his horse, spurred hard. Dust rose, swallowing him and his men, leaving the ranch in a silence heavy as iron. Mara drew a long breath, her hands still trembling. Cole glanced at her, and for the first time his eyes were not wholly cold. There was something else there, unnamed. "He doesn't let go easy," he murmured. Mara answered, steady as steel, "Neither do I." Rumors spread in Red Haven like fire on dry grass. Dalton's saloon, Henderson's store, even the church porch buzzed with it. She wrecked a family in Kansas. Hargrave's hiding something in that house. Kane will have the ranch before winter. Words became weapons. Mara felt the eyes whenever she walked into town. Children jeered, shouted names, but she did not leave. Each night she lit the lamp in Hollow Creek's kitchen, set supper on the table, wiped away dust, as if to prove to the house itself that it deserved to live. Cole watched in silence. He saw how she faced what he himself had chosen to flee. Memories, whispers, ghosts. The weight still pressed him, but her presence began to crack the stone wrapped around his heart. Ambrose's campaign grew sharper. He sent men to slash feed sacks, bribed merchants to turn Mara away. One morning Jonas led her to the storeroom, showing the grain ripped open, spilled like entrails. "A warning," he muttered. Mara only nodded, her eyes fierce. "If he threatens, it means he fears. That means we hold what he can't take by force." Cole stood behind, hearing every word, and for the first time in years, another's voice carried a glimmer of the thing he thought dead: resolve. That night, Cole sat alone on the porch, the wind carrying wolves' cries from far ridges. His mind dragged back to war, mud, smoke, blood, and Ambrose Kane collapsing into his arms. For years, Cole had stayed silent, letting Kane build an empire on the lie of heroism. But Mara's arrival and the will she had stumbled upon showed him silence was no longer an option. Old debts had curdled into new vendettas. Hollow Creek was the battlefield now. In the kitchen, Mara sat beneath lamplight, her hand resting on her mother's silver clasp. She whispered to herself, "If this is the last place left to me, then here I stand." The vow echoed through the timber walls, sank into the night, and waited for the storm to come. The first flame rose unnoticed in the dark, a fragile spark, trembling like a lost firefly, caught in the heap of dry straw stacked too long in the corner of the stable. The canyon wind funneled down, seized it, and in moments turned it into a licking tongue of fire. Within a handful of breaths, the red glow spread, devouring the weathered gray boards. Mara woke to the smell of smoke. Not the familiar scent of hearth or stove, but sharp, savage, like the scream of a wounded beast. She bolted upright, threw on a wool cloak, bare feet striking the cold floor as she rushed onto the porch. Before her, Hollow Creek's sky blazed, its stable a towering pyre. Fear surged, but her hands did not tremble. She spun back, seized the shotgun from the rack by the door. Cole had loaded it days ago, telling her, "Out here, you keep ready for wolves." Wolves had not come. Another predator had. She ran into the yard, firelight flaring in her hair until it shone like burning copper. Horses screamed, hooves crashed against the walls. Mara shouted, her voice splitting the night. "Out! Out!" She wrenched open the door, heat scalding her skin. A horse lunged through, eyes wide, nearly toppling her. She held firm, shotgun tight in her grip, scanning the dark. And there, just for a heartbeat, she saw it. A shadow slipping past the fence, quick, deliberate. A man's hand had set this blaze. No time for doubt. Mara planted herself before the house door. If someone had struck the match, they wouldn't stop with the stables. The ranch itself was the prize. And now she, the outcast woman branded in rumor, was the lone sentinel. The night cracked with horses' cries, timbers bursting, ash swirling like snow. Mara's grip hardened, her pulse thundered, but her eyes were ice. Whoever came, she would fire. No retreat, nothing left to lose but the ground beneath her feet. Cole returned through the howling wind, the scent of smoke thick even from afar. His horse skidded at the gate as he saw the inferno, the sky lit red as doomsday. And there, at the center, Mara. The woman once whispered unclean, condemned in Kansas, now stood firm, shotgun leveled at the dark, unshaken. Cole faltered. Since the night he lost wife and child, Hollow Creek had been a grave, and every soul who entered, a trespasser. But in the fire's glare, Mara burned into his sight. Not a squatter, not a ghost of past disgrace. She was of this land now, defending it with blood and breath. He plunged into the blaze, cutting reins, driving horses to safety. Fire scorched his skin, singed his hair, but he pressed on. Amid the chaos, he saw her still holding the line, her figure etched in firelight, small yet unyielding, like a tree rooted against storm. When at last the flames were beaten back, the stable lay in black ruin. A few horses trembled along the fence, eyes rolling with terror. Jonas, the old horse hand, wept like a child, hands black with ash. But the ranch stood. The house had not burned. Cole looked around, then locked eyes with Mara. In them was ash and fire and a wordless acknowledgement. His voice came rough, broken. "You didn't run." Mara only nodded, lips pressed tight. No excuses. They both knew, had she faltered, Hollow Creek would be cinders, but the night was not finished. As they cleared the wreckage, Cole spotted footprints in the dirt. Not Jonas's, not panicked horses. Human, heavy. The ground showed where oil had been poured. Someone had kindled this fire and vanished. Cole's silence was sharper than curses. He knew only one man carried reason enough: Ambrose Kane. Kane wanted Hollow Creek ruined, so come morning the town would speak only of ash and failure. He said nothing aloud, but Mara had already seen. Her smoke-reddened eyes shone with grim certainty. She asked no what now. She simply stood at his side. And in that moment, an alliance was forged, in fire, not ink. The blaze had taken much: beams, beasts, timber, but it left behind something else: a recognition. For the first time, Cole saw Mara not as a tenant clinging to shelter, but as the one who had stood guard in his absence, ready to bleed for the ranch. A wall within him cracked. Not much, but enough for light to seep through. And in that light, Mara's figure still burned, fierce and unwavering, even as the night sky glowed red with ruin. Cole found no sleep after the night the stables burned. The red blaze still seared behind his eyes. The smoke clung stubborn on his leather coat. He sat for hours on the porch, shotgun resting across his knees, staring into the silence. Inside, Mara moved quietly, sweeping away the ash that had settled in every corner. From the moment he saw her stand before the house with a shotgun in her hands, a truth had pressed upon him with wordless weight. Hollow Creek was no longer his alone. That night, instead of drowning in whiskey, Cole descended into the records cellar, the place he had avoided for years. The air was damp, cabinets sagging with dust, papers piled without order. The lantern cast his shadow long across the walls. The third drawer screeched when he wrenched it open, rust biting its hinges. Inside lay a thick stack of papers, edges yellowed with age. He searched for deeds and titles, some proof of Ambrose's claim. But what he found was familiar. His father's signature, Nathaniel Holloway, scrawled across contracts. Cole's hands trembled as he pulled free a bundle tied with a faded blue ribbon. The words at the top made his breath stop cold. Inheritance bequeathed to the firstborn son, Samuel Holloway. He fell back into the chair, lungs seizing. Samuel, the boy who never lived long enough to see a summer. Cole remembered too clearly. The tiny hand curling into his palm, the broken cries in the nursery he had forbidden Mara to enter. All of it crashed back with the force of a wave. He read on. The unfiled will named Samuel as heir. By law, with the rightful heir deceased, no outsider could force sale of the ranch. Ownership could pass only through Holloway blood, a shield of law ironclad. Ambrose Kane could have wealth, influence, a town at his back, but he could not touch Hollow Creek. Cole pressed the pages to his brow, torn between relief and ruin. The ranch survived only because of Samuel's name. The child who had never grown still guarded the land, binding Cole to memories that refused to let him go. Mara found him the next morning, still in the cellar, unmoving. She called softly, but he did not stir. Coming closer, she saw the bundle in his grip, Samuel's name clear on the front page. She touched his shoulder gently, whispering, "You don't have to carry this alone." Cole lifted his face, gray eyes dark with shadow. "You don't understand. This house, everything, exists because of a name I can never speak again." Mara said nothing, only sat beside him. The cellar air was stifling, yet her presence was a small lamp holding him from the abyss. That night Cole locked the files away in the iron cabinet, but what he had read could not be buried. For Ambrose, it was a weapon that barred his schemes. For Cole, it was a blade twisting in memory. 3 days later, Ambrose Kane rode up with 2 lawyers and a deed of sale. He stood tall, smile sharp with triumph. Hollow Creek has no place left in this territory. Sign and be done with it. Cole laid the will on the table. The old court seal, red as dried blood, still glared from the page. This ranch isn't mine, he said quietly. It belongs to Samuel Holloway, and no one outside Holloway blood has claim to it. Ambrose stiffened. He had never imagined Cole kept such a card. His lawyers muttered, pale with unease. At last Ambrose growled, "A dead child cannot guard land." Cole's voice rasped, gravel against stone. "He already has." Mara, watching from behind, saw it in Cole's eyes, not only grief, but strength in accepting the past, even as it tore him apart. Ambrose turned on his heel, but his glare promised darker strikes to come. Mara knew the war had just begun. That night, she crept back into the nursery. The crib stood under its shroud of dust. Toys lay scattered. She touched the wooden horse with trembling fingers, whispered as though to a child who had never grown, "You kept this home for your father. Now let me keep your father for this place." From then on, Mara no longer shrank from Cole's silence. She knew what lay behind it, a heart shattered, still fighting. Hollow Creek, with all its sorrow, had bound them together. Each step Mara took in the house carried more weight, yet more certainty. She cleaned not only to breathe life into Hollow Creek, but to honor the name Samuel, the child who guarded it in eternal silence. Cole moved differently, too. His pace slowed in the halls, his hand resting on door frames, as if to speak with ghosts. At times, he sat for hours on the porch, gray eyes fixed on the mountains, lips shaping the name he rarely dared speak. Mara never intruded. She only remained, her presence steady, the quiet tether keeping him from unraveling. Until one dawn, with the prairie glowing rose, Cole spoke at last. "Thank you for not leaving." It was the first word of gratitude since she set foot at Hollow Creek. Mara only nodded, for the answer was already in his eyes. Amid loss, they had begun to find one another. That morning, Hollow Creek felt charged with something strange. The town, usually slow to stir, pulsed with the noise of the first spring market, folk drawn not only to barter and trade, but to hear what was to unfold at the town hall. Word had spread fast as prairie fire. Cole Whitaker would bring forth papers of law, setting himself against Ambrose Kane, the richest land baron in the valley, and the man whose shadow stretched over half the territory. Mara walked behind Cole through the rows of stalls, every look pinning her, whispers prickling her skin like thorns. Since she had come to the ranch, she had not felt so hemmed in by people. But fear had no place today. In its stead was resolve, to defend the land and the man who had become the last anchor for her heart. Cole carried the old leather satchel filled with documents salvaged after the fire. The pages were worn, edges yellow, but the signatures were clear. Hollow Creek was recorded in the name of his lost son. That meant, by law, Ambrose could not force a sale. The price of that knowledge was grief gouging deeper into Cole. Yet he had chosen to bring it into the light. The church bell tolled 3 times. The townsfolk crowded into the timber hall, shoulder to shoulder under dim lamplight. Pine scent mingled with sweat, whispers rolling like restless wind, until the room seemed to hum with tension. Cole stepped to the stand, placed the satchel down. His voice was low, steady, carrying through the hush. He spoke of inheritance, of his father's hand upon each deed, then drew out the worn papers, holding them for all to see. Heads nodded, others squinted with doubt, but the room held its breath. Then Ambrose Kane rose slowly. His velvet coat set him apart, his smile gleaming with arrogance. He did not look at Cole. He fixed his eyes on Mara. "How touching," Ambrose drawled, smooth as oil. "A man clinging to mildewed papers to keep a land that died with his son. But neighbors, I fear our tale today is larger than that. For among us is a new arrival, a housekeeper in name whose past is far less clean." The room stirred. Mara went rigid. Cole's brow darkened, hand tightening on the stand. At Ambrose's signal, a man stepped from the back. Slender, hair slicked, eyes darting with unease but cloaked in false composure. Mara recognized him instantly. Timothy Harland, the fiancé she had left behind in Kansas. He carried a bundle of letters, trembling as he handed them to Ambrose. The land baron lifted them high, triumphant. "Here, friends, a love letter never sent. In it, Miss Mara promises marriage, only to vanish, leaving a good family disgraced. Is this not why she wanders, attaching herself to new ground?" Whispers turned to sneers. Women pressed hands to lips. Men whistled low and mocking. Mara stood rooted, face drained, every word slicing open wounds she had buried. Cole saw the breath stutter in her chest, saw her eyes widen, and memory surged. The first time he met her, when she had said, "I won't run." Yet now, before the town, she was cornered. Ambrose pressed on, voice lowered but loud enough to carry. If a woman can betray her betrothal, can she be trusted with greater matters? With a ranch? With a man's legacy? Tell me, do we believe she stands by Cole Whitaker for love or for land? The hall swelled, a hive broken. Some nodded, some turned their eyes away. Cole's fists clenched white at the knuckles, though he held his tongue. Mara's chest heaved, her throat tight. She longed to cry the truth, that the engagement had been no promise of love but a cage set by her parents. Yet her voice failed, and silence bound her like rope. To the crowd, her quiet became confession. A woman in the back called, "I heard she ruined a family in Kansas. Now she claws at this ranch, scheming." Murmurs became jeers. Mara felt the cord inside her pulled to breaking. Every effort she had made to keep Hollow Creek alive was shadowed now by slander. Cole's eyes left the crowd, fixed on her. She was trembling, but her spine was straight. He understood. This was the brink. Either they would fall, or they would stand together. Ambrose smiled, savoring victory. "See, neighbors, the truth I warned of. A man once a soldier hero, now ensnared by a woman of scandal. Is this not tragedy?" Laughter spilled. Mara closed her eyes, breath gone from her chest. Then, sudden, the scrape of wood on floor. Cole had left the stand. He crossed to her side and faced Ambrose head-on. The hall froze. All sound held. And in that silence, both the crowd and Mara herself felt it. The bond between two scarred souls being tested to its limit. A bond that might snap, or forge into chains no storm could break. The crowd in the midday marketplace fell silent, as if even the wind itself had been barred from passing through the square. Ambrose Cain's slander still clung to the air, heavy as dust no hand could sweep away. Mara stood pale, chin lifted, though her eyes were hollow, drained of strength. Once more she was dragged back into the same mire she had fled in Kansas. An outcast, a liar, a woman branded with stains that could not be washed clean. Cole stood beside her, jaw tight as iron. He longed to smash the lie with his fists, but war had taught him this truth. A bullet can silence a crowd, but it cannot kill the whisper that breeds doubt. If he lost his temper now, Mara would lose everything. Ambrose wore his victory like a cloak. He fastened his coat with unhurried fingers, eyes sweeping the townsfolk as though he were reaping a harvest. "You see?" he purred. "A woman who fled her betrothed, leaving disgrace behind in Kansas. And now, suddenly, she appears here, beside Cole Whitmore? A rich patch of land, a widowed man, too easy to exploit." Murmurs swelled. An old woman shook her head. A youth whistled low. Others averted their eyes from Mara, as if her very presence might stain them. She bit her lip hard, but her eyes brimmed with tears. It was then, at the breaking point, that another voice rang out. Not loud, but sharp and steady as a needle piercing cloth. "That's enough, Ambrose Cain." All heads turned. From the crowd stepped Sarah, the town's seamstress. A simple cotton dress clung to her frame, her fingers still smudged with colored thread, as though she had left her sewing in haste. Her face bore no fierceness, but her eyes burned with a resolve everyone recognized. Ambrose scowled. "And what would you know?" Sarah did not answer at once. From her satchel she drew an envelope, yellowed with age, its seal unbroken. She raised it high, so the light struck the wax. "I know," she said, "because I've kept this letter for 3 years. A letter from that same man in Kansas, and it tells a very different story." The crowd stirred. People leaned forward, craning to see. Mara trembled. Sarah opened the letter and read. In it, the Kansas man confessed that it was he who had been weak. Forced into marriage by family, he lacked the courage to defend Mara from scorn. He had let her bear the blame, let her name be dragged through mud, and afterward spread lies to shield his own honor. The letter was his late confession, an apology Mara had never received. Sarah's voice was calm, steady, each word falling heavy as stones. Whistles ceased. Laughter died. Silence and shame spread across the room like ink in water. When she folded the letter, her hand shook. "I kept it," she said softly, "because I knew one day the truth must come. Mara did not vanish in disgrace. She was betrayed by cowardice and lies." Ambrose's fists curled, veins swelling. "That rotting scrap proves nothing," he snarled. But the edge in his voice had dulled. Cole stepped forward then, laying his hand upon Mara's shoulder. The simple gesture hushed the square. He faced the townsfolk, his voice gravel-low yet ringing. "I lost everything once because I believed in lies. I will not lose again." It was oath and challenge both. A ripple passed through the crowd. Eyes that once held contempt now faltered, some nodding slowly, others clapping in scattered rhythm. Mara looked up at him. In his eyes was no doubt, no guarded steel, only trust laid bare. His hand anchored her, pulling her back from the edge of collapse. Ambrose shouted, voice cracking, "Fools! You'll all pay when I hold the water rights." But his words rang hollow, the cry of a beast cornered. The townsfolk no longer listened. Their murmurs turned in Mara's favor. Perhaps we were wrong. She's not what they said. Whitmore still stands, unbroken. Sarah withdrew, breath unsteady. Mara embraced her tightly, tears spilling at last. Tears not of shame but release. Applause grew, spreading until it drowned Ambrose's curses. For the first time in years, Mara felt she was no longer alone. The tale was not ended, but the bond thought frayed to breaking had been knotted anew, stronger than before. Night fell over Hollow Creek like a black blanket spread wide, studded with 1,000 stars shining thicker than most nights. The quarrel at the market, the slander and the clearing of a name, all of it had blown past like a storm, leaving behind a rare silence. In that stillness, Cole's ranch cast a gentle glow from the oil lamp burning on the porch. The chirp of crickets, the whisper of wind threading through the grass, and the faint smoke of firewood from the hearth inside all mingled with the night air. Mara sat on an old wooden chair, her fingers brushing the seam of her dress, a habit that never left her, the touch of a seamstress, even when life had pushed her into the role of housekeeper. Her breath was still uneven from days of withstanding the lash of wagging tongues, yet in her eyes, for the first time in years, flickered a glimmer of peace. Cole stepped out onto the porch. He drew near, his strides slow and heavy, the wood groaning beneath his boots. Mara lifted her gaze, and their eyes met. Nothing left to prove, nothing left to hide. Only the truth that they had walked together through the darkest of days. He stopped before her chair, and then, sudden as thunder, dropped to one knee. The act startled Mara, her hand clutching at her chest. He took her hand, his voice rough, but every word cut clear. Mara Ellison, you walked into the place no one dared, into this house, into this heart. You gave me back life itself, a life I thought buried forever with my child and the years of war. Will you be my wife? Mara froze. Every jeer in Kansas, every scornful glance in this town, every old wound still raw, they surged back, yet they only made this moment burn stronger. Her eyes welled. She heard nothing but her own heartbeat, saw nothing but the man kneeling at her feet, the face of truth, of loyalty. She nodded. Just the smallest motion, yet the stars above seemed to blaze brighter. Cole drew a breath, squeezed her hand as though letting go meant losing all again. Rising, he folded her into his arms. Mara pressed against him, felt the warmth of his body seep into hers. Their breaths mingled, words no longer needed. In her mind echoed memories, the night the sky burned red, and she stood guarding the doorway, the moment Cole's gaze found her in the flames, the market square where gossip nearly crushed her, and his hand clasped hers before the eyes of all. Each fragment now bound whole in the circle of his embrace. A sudden wind swept through, tilting the oil lamp's flame. Cole drew his coat around Mara's shoulders, a simple act yet complete. She looked up at him, lips trembling. Are you sure? I don't want to be a burden. I've carried enough disgrace. He touched a finger to her lips, shook his head. I lost everything once, believing in lies. I won't lose again. Least of all you. In that moment, all of Hollow Creek vanished, leaving only a small wooden porch and the endless sky of stars. The reeds whispered in the field. The creek shimmered silver in the night, all serving as the music for a vow left unspoken. Mara laid her head on Cole's shoulder. She did not dream of a perfect life. Out here in the West, nothing came easy. But she knew that from this night forward, through any storm, there would be a hand holding hers fast. That night, Hollow Creek bore witness to a new beginning. No church bells, no wedding gown, only the oil lamp, a clumsy but earnest proposal, and two souls who had found each other amid ruin. In their hearts, happiness was not built on grandeur, but on the courage to see each other's worth when the world had turned away. Cole and Mara remained on the porch, speaking no more. The stars kept shining, as though to testify to a silent promise that from this day, this ranch, this land, and this heart would be guarded by two. Half a year had passed since the night the sky burned red with the fire that devoured the old horse barn. Hollow Creek Ranch had slowly risen again beneath the patient hands and unyielding shoulders of Cole and Mara. New timber stood tall, the scent of pine sap and the bite of fresh nails still lingering. On the signboard hanging out front, words were carved plain and proud. Hollow Creek Ranch, Cole and Mara Hargrave. It was more than a name. It was the testament of a new life. Their wedding came at the close of autumn, when the hills were cloaked in copper gold, and the wind carried the chill of winter pressing near. Across the wide prairie, half the town gathered. They brought cornbread, cider, baskets of smoked meat. The wedding was no grandeur, yet warm, and it was the kind of warmth a body would carry in memory all their life. Mara stepped out from the wooden house, her dress a simple white stitched by hand. No fancy lace, no embroidery, only a slender ribbon tied at the waist. In her brown hair, Lydia set sprigs of dried lavender. Little Jacob scampered beside her, clutching a ring wrapped in worn velvet. Every step Mara took was steady, her gaze unshaken. 6 months ago, she was a woman shunned and whispered about. Today, every look cast her way brimmed with respect. Cole stood waiting on the porch, his gray suit worn but pressed clean. When Mara reached him, he offered his hand. Not a grand gesture, only a rough hand held out to a woman, but within it lay the promise no battlefield nor passing year had ever given him. I will not leave you alone. When the minister spoke, silence fell thick. Only the wind through the shingles and the crackle of fire in the yard filled the air. When Cole's turn came, he fixed his eyes on Mara, then turned to the faces that had known him all his life. His voice was low, but every word rang clear. Family is not just blood, it is a choice, and today I choose her. The words struck like a bell. Mara's hand trembled, not from fear, but because for the first time in her life, someone declared before all that she was chosen, not abandoned. Jacob and Lydia clasped hands, their eyes bright as lanterns. The wedding rolled on with old Jenkins's fiddle, clapping hands and laughter rising like birds in flight. They danced the circle dances, passed mugs of warm cider from hand to hand. In the new barn, oil lamps cast a glow over timber beams, rustic and near magical. Mara and Cole stood in the circle, moving slow to a waltz. With each step, the crowd saw two broken lives pieced together into one whole picture. And just when it seemed the day would close on that fullness, a rider thundered in from the east. His coat was long, covered in trail dust. In his hand, a letter sealed with the mark of the state. The crowd hushed as Cole tore it open under their watchful eyes. The message was brief. Ambrose Kane had fled the county. He'd been caught swindling land elsewhere, his fortune stripped, his name struck from the rolls of respectable landowners. No bullet had ended him, no final duel in the dust. The man who haunted Hollow Creek had undone himself by greed too heavy to bear. The crowd murmured, not with wild joy, but with the weary relief of justice done. Sometimes, justice did not require blood. Cole looked to Mara. Their eyes met. In that glance was release, sorrow for what had been, but more than that, faith that the ghosts would no longer rattle their doors at night. Mara gave the smallest nod and leaned into his shoulder as the music rose again. The feast stretched long into the night. On the new-laid ground, footprints and laughter mingled with the scent of hay, hearth smoke, and the shimmer of moonlight. When most had gone, Cole and Mara still danced slow beneath the barn's oil lamps. No music needed now, only the rhythm of two hearts beating as one. Outside, the wind swept over the hills, carrying the whisper of earth and sky. An old chapter had closed, and a new one, brighter, had begun. This tale leaves its echo. Happiness may come late, but it is never too late. What do you think? Can love and a new home truly wipe away the shadows of the past? I'd be glad to hear your thoughts below in the comments. And if this story has touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share, so we can keep alive the pieces of the Old West worth remembering. For who knows, perhaps in each of us, there still lies a hollow creek waiting to be lit.